Get cozy with me as I tell you the birth story of my first son. I've been waiting for the 10-minute timer feature so that I could share my birth stories in great detail with lots of photos, so get ready. I got pregnant about 7 months after Ian and I got married. We were trying, so we were very excited, and my due date was July 25th, which is in the middle of summer here. It was so hot and humid, I have to show you my ankle. Sorry for the jump scare. Had a pretty normal first pregnancy with an anterior placenta. We found out we were having a boy at 20 weeks, and I was planning an unmedicated labor, which you'll see did not go to plan. I turned 39 weeks, and then on July 20th, the day this photo was taken, I started having contractions. So don't always believe that just because it's your first, you're gonna go late. That's not always the case. It was a typical Sunday for us. We weren't expecting to go into labor, and after dinner, I started to lose pieces of my mucus plug, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And then we were watching a show, and I was bouncing on my yoga ball, and I started to feel these like period cramps, this tightening, and I thought, could this be it? Well, in my head, these contractions are getting closer together and more intense, so I'm convinced it's the beginning of labor, but it was so early on in labor. And anyway, we go to bed early. I can't sleep, so I wake up. I'm like, I'm gonna make him this cake. I bought him a birthday cake box mix, and then I was like, no, they're just too intense. Oh my gosh. So I'm bouncing on the ball. I get in the shower and sit on a shower bench, and Ian's pushing on my back. We're doing all the things. And then around 4 a.m., we decide to call. Actually, it was like earlier than that. We call the OB, and she's like, do you really think she needs to go in? And I could hear her talking to Ian, and he's like, he didn't know what to say. So we tried to wait a little longer, but it was about 4 a.m. that we decided to drive into the hospital. Arrive at triage, and they check me, and I am 1 centimeter dilated, and very sad about this. But for some reason, they let me stay. I don't know if it's because they had space or they saw that I was in a lot of pain, but they let us walk around labor and delivery for an hour, and then they checked me again, and I was a stretchy 2 to 3 centimeters. So they decided to admit me to a room. At this point, I'm wondering where my glamorous birth experience went, because we get there, and instead of keeping my own clothes on like I wanted to do, I put on the hospital gown, and I started throwing up at this point, which as someone with emetophobia was really scary to me, but I will assure you that you are not thinking about that in the moment when you were having contractions. And for my subsequent births, I did not get sick. I am working through these contractions, and by 8:30 a.m., I'm already at 4 centimeters, so I'm like, okay, we can do this, we got this. I'm bouncing the ball, I'm in the shower because none of the rooms with the birthing tubs were available, and then my family's starting to arrive, they all call off work. I know, it's weird, but we're really close, and we go to each other's first birth. This is just some of the people that were in and out of my room that day. I do want to point out that my mom had really quick labors. With me, her first, she had me in 4 hours, okay? It was like 2 hours of labor, 2 hours of pushing. So we all had reason to believe this might go quickly. They check me again at 2 p.m. and I am 7 centimeters, and I am so happy with that progress. Like at this point, I'm like, we can do this. We're gonna have a baby this evening, like in a few hours. Again, I was wrong. As contractions got more painful for me, I started to get really, really tired, and I was laying down. And I would fall asleep between each contraction, and my husband assured me that it was like 5+ minutes between each, but I really thought they were on top of each other, that we were getting close. But I was waking up, writhing in pain through the contraction, and then passing out immediately after. When they checked me again at 7 p.m., I was still at 7 centimeters. That means I had been at 7 for 5 hours, and I was starting to panic. By the way, I had also asked for my waters to be broken at like 4:30 p.m. because they had been bulging all day, but there was no one on call who could break them until about 7. So then I was thinking, well, they're going to get more intense when your waters break. I know this. And so I was starting to panic even more. Another thing that happened at this time is a different nurse that wasn't mine came in to help my nurse with something, and I could hear her whisper, she's going to ask for the epidural soon. And I was like, you know what? I didn't need to hear that. That really got in my head. So just remember that birthing people are very susceptible to what you're saying, and we are listening. And that really sucked. Quick side note that I want to mention, my face also decided to do this really cool thing where I got a rash when I was in pain and in labor, and it didn't go away for like a week and a half after I gave birth. Another side note is that I believe to go unmedicated, you really either need to have all the information and all the coping skills and all the tools, or you need to like know nothing. My mom had 3 unmedicated labors because she really had no idea the process of how to give birth, right? Whereas I knew something in the middle, like I knew the word transition. And so I kept asking my nurse, when am I going to hit transition? When is transition coming? I'm nervous about transition. And she's like, oh, honey, you'll know when transition hits. And that was not the thing to say because that did not help me at all. After much deliberation with my mom and my husband, I decided to give up on my goal of going unmedicated. And while it was tough at the time, I think I definitely made the right decision. I was just so dehydrated and fatigued at this point that I was just losing steam. Before I got the epidural, I had to get an IV in my hand because thankfully they didn't do that right when I arrived. And then I had to get 2 bags of fluids. And then I got the epidural, which went really well, except for the whole sitting still thing. It was instant relief, which was great. I was also shaking at this point. I was starting to get a fever. Like it was rough. The epidural they gave me also wasn't too strong, so I really liked it. It was like the perfect amount. I could still move my legs, and then I could feel pressure at the end, as you'll find out. But they would put a peanut ball in between my legs and they'd put me on one side, and then an hour later, they'd flip me to the other side. Then at 11 p.m. I was 9 centimeters, and by midnight I was complete, and then they wanted me to labor down for an hour because his head was not engaged. I never have babies that drop ahead of time. They just don't do. I started pushing a little after 1 a.m. and at this point I was so burpy from my heartburn, like I was gagging on it and I couldn't focus. So they gave me some meds for that, and they also gave me an oxygen mask. When I tell you I had no idea how hard pushing would be, like you have to give 110%, and I didn't even have like 50% left in me. I was like, wow, this is a lot more difficult than I had anticipated. His head would come down and then it would go back up. They even gave me a mirror for a while, which was cool to watch, but it also got me depressed because I'd be like, I push, 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 and then he would go back a little. And by the end, I was feeling so much pressure down there that I was like screaming because I would know when the contractions started. They'd try to tell me to start pushing. I'd already be pushing because I could feel when it was time. After 2.5 hours of pushing, which I cannot complain about to my sister because she pushed for 4, his head came out and everyone was really happy and excited. And then it got really stressful. It got really stressful because his shoulders got stuck and he had what's called shoulder dystocia. It lasted about a minute. The OB had to push a button. A ton of people rushed in. They were yelling at me to push. They were doing like maneuvers. I'm not even sure. It was a total blur to me, but my sister says she remembers the OB like pulling and shaking so hard from pulling his little arm out. I guess he had his arm stuck up by his head, which is why he took so long to descend and why he got stuck. But what upsets me about this is that I didn't find out until my 6-week checkup when she said, oh, for your next, you'll have to schedule a C-section. And I said, why? And she said, well, your babies don't fit. He got stuck. And I was like, no explanation, no talk about it, no preventative care, nothing. Like, we're just going to schedule. So needless to say, I did switch providers for my second. My sweet baby Ewan arrived at 3:40 a.m. on July 22nd, and he was perfect. This photo was so raw and emotional for me for obvious reasons. Like, I was experiencing so many new things, and yet I was so relieved and so happy at the same time. Like, I can't even tell you all of the feelings I was feeling. If only we could bottle up that feeling and sensation of meeting your baby for the first time. There is truly nothing like it. He did come out covered in meconium, but there were no issues from that. And then we had some jaundice that we had to take care of before he left the hospital, which is pretty typical. Overall, I was just so proud of myself for giving birth and having a 31-hour labor. And I really didn't know how scary the shoulder stuff had been because no one told me. He even got his birthday cake because the hospital gave us this little square cake that says, welcome Ewan. I love this picture because it's our first family moment trying to figure something out together. Like, get the boob in his mouth, get him to suck. And I do think that's one of the last times I ever wore a cover because we don't have time for that. He is so precious, my sweet baby Ewan, but don't blink because pretty soon they're almost 9 years old and asking you for a cell phone. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to my birth story. I love talking about birth. I love sharing these personal stories with you guys, and I just thank you for being here.